صل على محمد وآل محمد جل فرجهم.
رحم الله من قرأ سورة المباركة الفاتحة. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. فوضوا أمري إلى الله إن الله بصير بالعباد ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. حسبنا الله ونعم الوكيل ونعم المولى ونعم النصير. والصلاة والسلام والتحية والإكرام على الرسول المسدد المصطفى الأمجد المحمود الأحمد الذي سمي في السماء بأحمد وفي الأرض بأبي القاسم محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين المنتجبين الذين أذهب الله عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا. اللهم صل على محمد. وقل رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. أما بعد، قال الله تبارك وتعالى في كتاب الكريم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. والشعراء يتبعهم الغاوون ألم تر أنهم في كل واد يحيمون وأنهم يقولون ما لا يفعلون إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وذكروا الله كثيرا وانتصروا من بعد ما ظلموا وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون. صدق الله العلي العظيم. زينوا مجالسكم بالصلوات على محمد وآل محمد. اللهم صل على. For the love of Ali ibn Abi Talib, salawatullah as-salam, sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala. And for the hastening of the reappearance of Imam Sahib al-Asri wa Zaman, sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. My respected elders, brothers and sisters in Iman, salamun alaykum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Question: what's the relationship between Islam and poetry? Keep that question in the back of your mind. When we come to human communication, there are some elements that our Creator has endowed us with, that He has not given other creations. When we look at the animal kingdom, when we look at those fish that are in the seas, when we look at the birds that are in the skies, they may have a form of communication. But when it comes to the realm of science, scientists have come forward and said that the method of communication that human beings has, it's much more evolved than others. And we are still learning about much of the kingdom, but we have been endowed with certain aspects that God has given us that other creations do not have. One of those is the mode of communication. And when we come to this, we must understand what are the different methods of communication our Creator has given us, and how are we to use those. This is the first aspect of the discussion. The second aspect of the discussion is the relationship of poetry and us. Many times in our majalis, in our Husainiyas, in our Imam Bargahs, in our programs, we begin with the zikr of Marsiya. We begin with a salam. We begin with some poetry at the beginning. And we also recite poetry at the end in the form of a noha, for example, or a latam, or some type of form of lamentation, all usually in the form of poetry. And even during the lecture, many a times, the speaker will use poetry in their lecture. Therefore, when the question comes forward, is poetry something that Islam has favorably looked upon it? Has it frowned upon it? Or is it that Islam has no relationship with poetry and this is purely something that is cultural? What's the answer to this question? Because you and I have programs, as we will. We have majlises in which there is poetry recited. And sometimes people wonder, this is something that's just cultural. It has nothing to do with faith. Let's get rid of it altogether. And others come forward and no, they say this is part of our faith. We need to look at this question and understand, what does my religion say with respect to this? What is it that is allowed in terms of poetry? Is all poetry allowed? Or is some form of poetry allowed? And if so, what forms of poetry are allowed within our belief system? This is what we want to look at in the next few moments that we have together. In this analysis, I want to look at a few things. I want to look firstly at what are the different modes of communication that our Lord, our Creator, has given us. What is it that other communities, not necessarily Muslims, Christians, Jews, and other faiths, what has their relationship been with poetry? Have they had a relationship? Because poetry is a human form of communication, not limited just to Islam. So have they had a relationship? What has the Quran al-Majid wa Furqan al-Hamid said about poetry in the chapter 26 of the Quran, Surah Shu'ara? And what is the clear indication there? What are the ahadith of the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam with respect to poetry? What have they said about it? And who were those individuals who were the poets of the court of the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam? And what did the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam say? And 6, what were those elements and there's moments in time from Karbala to Kufa and Sham that the Ahlul Bayt themselves recited poetry? And who was reciting poetry during that time? This is what I want to look at in the brief moments that we have together, inshallah. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. When we come to the form of communications, we as human beings have been endowed by our Creator with a level of intellect that other creations may not have. Although the jury is still out on this, when you look at, for example, bees that the Quran alludes to in Surah Nahl, for example, scientists are now coming forward and saying that they use quantum mechanics, what we call quantum mechanics, to identify where pollen is in bees for the flowers to get honey. And ants use actually algorithms that you and I use in science and computer science in order to find the shortest path to food. The jury is still out on that. But nonetheless, we as human beings have been able to use our intellect to form buildings, to form those things that other creations of Allah have not been able to. Therefore, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made you and I and gave us the potential to be ashraf al-makhluqat, meaning the best of His creation. If we use that potential that He has given us by means of the aql, the rationality. You know, the prefrontal cortex of the brain? This front part is an amazing part of the human brain, which can do very complicated tasks that other creations cannot do. We have, if you will, as psychologists have argued, system 1 and system 2 in our brain. System 1 being the reptilian animalistic brain, which we share with other creations of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the limbic system, for example. And then we have this particular system 2, which is the rational front that allows us to do mathematics and sciences and all of these things. If we use this rational part of the brain, we can become more elevated than the angels. And if we do not use this rational part of the brain, we can become worse than the haywanat, the animals. By the way, animals are not bad. I'm saying that they are not endowed with aql, and therefore you cannot hold them liable. The same way that somebody who may not be given reason, they may not be sane, we cannot blame them. Analogously, for an animal, you can't blame the animal. When it comes to human communication, we have a few forms of communication. One form of communication is prose. Nasr, for example. Prose, literature, things that you read in a novel, a book, things of this nature. Another form of that mode of communication is what is called poetry, or shi'r. In this language of poetry, you find rhythm, you find meter, you find many aspects. But in modern times, you also find, for example, you will find an element of no rhythm, no meter, but just imagery. Imagery about beauty, imagery about society, depth of imagery. And at this point in time, we come to a beautiful quotation from Iqbal, Allama Iqbal, who in the Persian subcontinent, he's known as Iqbal al-Lahori, and in our subcontinent, he's known as Allama Iqbal. And he says, truth that is not burning, truth that is not on fire is called philosophy. When truth catches fire, we call it poetry. That truth that is the haqq when it catches fire, it goes in the form of poetry. Therefore, human beings have understood that poetry is a very, very strong form of communication. And you don't have to take my word for it. I will share some research with you. Research that was conducted in Europe at Bangor University for one. And they took people and they did an fMRI scan on them and an EEG scan on their minds, listening to poetry. So what they did was, this happened in Wales, in the Welsh language. People who were speaking the Welsh language. What they did was, they hooked their brains up to fMRI scans and EEGs, and they said, hold on a second. This is poetry that is in the Welsh language. There were two categories. One category was structured Welsh poetry. The other category was unstructured. But the people who were reading the poetry did not know which was structured and which was unstructured. But when they constantly read this poetry in the Welsh language, these speakers of the Welsh language, according to Bangor University, they all said the structured one, which they didn't know it was structured, they said this is better work. This is good. Meaning the researchers realized that structure of poetry is wired in the human brain. That is, there are certain things that our human element is wired for. What's another example of something we're wired for? We're wired for storytelling. That's why when you go to the ancient caves and you study anthropology, you will find that people used to tell stories thousands of years ago, and they still tell stories till this day. Even in our majalis, if you want to engage with the audience, you are told to tell stories, because our minds are wired in that way. Another way, science is now finding that our minds are actually wired for poetry. In fact, the researchers at Bangor University found that moment, you know when you recite poetry and there's the punchline at the end, the annotation at the end, they found that annotation, that punchline at the end releases actually a burst of stimuli in the brain. That means the mind is actually attuned to this. It is very powerful. Another study that was conducted at the Max Planck Institute of Aesthetics in Europe, they looked at that moment. They asked people to listen to poetry and they gave in their hand a little sort of a buzzer. When they gave them a buzzer, at that point they said, when you feel a chill in your body, when you feel this poetry hit you, we want you to press the button. At that moment they said 40% of the people who actually listened to the poetry, they actually felt physical symptoms. They got goosebumps. The hair on the back of their neck stood up. That's how much impact the poetry had on them. You know what they said was interesting? They said the physical symptoms actually emerged in the individual 4.5 seconds before they actually pressed the button. It's akin to when you see a chocolate bar, you know, you see a candy bar and you anticipate, I'm about to open it and I'm about to eat it. When you're opening the wrapper, your body is also, or your mind is already releasing dopamine to feel the pleasure. So the establishment from these research in this study is one point, that poetry is extremely powerful and it can be used for a varying degree of things. Therefore, I want to look at what has Islam said about this matter. Does Islam have a perspective on this or not? Is poetry, for example, the poetry that we have recited, that we will be reciting tonight, and the poetry that will be in the Nawha and the Latam that we will have tonight, and throughout the year, is there an Islamic basis for this? Or is this something that is simply out of our whim and our culture? I want you to listen very carefully to this, and please do not derive any conclusion until I have completed the verses, because it is very technical. The Quran al-Majid wal Furqan al-Hamid, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in surah number 26, the entire chapter is called the poets, ash-shu'ara of the Quran al-Majid. That is the 26th chapter. The last verses, verse 224, 225, 226, and 227. What does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say in these verses? He says, وَالشُّعَرَاء يَتَّبِهُمُ الْغَاوُونَ أَلَمْ تَرَ أَنَّهُمْ فِي كُلِّ وَادٍ يَحِمُونَ وَأَنَّهُمْ يَقُولُونَ مَا لَا يَفْعَلُونَ إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ وَذَكَرَ اللَّهَ كَثِيرًا وَانْتَصَرُوا مِنْ بَعْدِ مَا ظُلِمُوا وَسَيَعْلَمُ الَّذِينَ ظَلَمُوا أَيَّ مَنْقَلِبٍ يَنْقَلِبُونَ. What does Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say? He says, وَالشُّعَرَاء يَتَّبِهُمُ الْغَاوُونَ. The shu'ara, the poets, only those who have gone astray follow them. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, not me. Only those who have gone astray follow the poets. أَلَمْ تَرَ أَنَّهُمْ فِي كُلِّ وَادٍ يَحِمُونَ. They just go around in valleys and wander aimlessly. You know, sometimes poets, in their poetry, they're talking about imagery, and some who remember the poetry of the subcontinent and Persia and Arabia, Layla and Majnun and all these things, they're talking about imagery. And a lot of it is, for example, exaggeration. It's part and parcel of poetry. And so the Quran says they're just wandering in valleys. They have no purpose. أَلَمْ تَرَ أَنَّهُمْ فِي كُلِّ وَادٍ يَحِمُونَ. They just wander about aimlessly. وَأَنَّهُمْ يَقُولُونَ مَا لَا يَفْعَلُونَ. And why do the poets say that which they do not do? Meaning there's a contradiction in the poets. That they say one thing, they write another thing. There is sort of a hypocrisy. What they're saying is going in one direction and what they're doing is in one direction. So the Quran has said, number one, only those who have gone astray follow poets. Number two, poets go around in valleys without any purpose, without any aim. And number three, the Quran says that those people who follow them, why is it that the poets, they say one thing, they do something else? The Quran seems to take a very harsh tone on poetry. But the analysis is not complete. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala continues. He says, إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ وَذَكَرَ اللَّهَ كَثِيرًا وَانْتَصَرُوا مِنْ بَعْدِ مَا ظُلِمُوا وَسَيَعْلَمُ الَّذِينَ ظَلَمُوا أَيَّ مَنْقَلِبٍ يَنْقَلِبُونَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, except those who believe in Allah. إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا. They believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ. And they do good actions and they do good deeds. وَذَكَرَ اللَّهَ كَثِيرًا. And they say Allah's name in abundance, in a great deal. وَانْتَصَرُوا مِنْ بَعْدِ مَا ظُلِمُوا. And they are those who write poetry after they have been oppressed. And they write poetry for those who have been oppressed. I tell you, from the poetry of Abu Talib, if you want to know who was the first poet who wrote in honor of Rasulullah in Islam, and you want to question the iman of Abu Talib was the first one who wrote poetry in honor of Rasulullah in Islam. If you want to know the iman, you don't need to look any further than the poetry of Abu Talib. It's very clear and categorical. Therefore, from this last verse, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and He finally says, Allah will, وَسَيَعْلَمُ الَّذِينَ ظَلَمُوا أَيَّ مَنْقَلِبٍ يَنْقَلِبُونَ, which you hear normally at the end of the majalis, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will not leave the zalimeen alone. He will take revenge on the zalimeen for the oppression that they do. Therefore, from this, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, poetry that does not have meaning, poetry that is purposeless, poetry that there is a hypocrisy in terms of what is said and what is done, that poetry in Islam is not accepted. But that poetry for those who believe, and those people who do good actions, and those people who use Allah's name in abundance, and those people who use poetry to help those who have been oppressed, that is good in the eyes of Islam. Therefore, in terms of what you and I believe and understand, our madhab from Abu Talib to all the poets of the Ahlul Bayt, we have always been defending those who have been oppressed, and we will continue to do so. Whether that is in poetry, whether that is in prose, we will continue to do so and use that. Why is this important? We come to what the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam said with respect to poetry and how powerful it can be in our lives. When we come to Rasulullah, the first poet after Abu Talib was a man by the name of Hassan bin Sabit. Hassan bin Sabit was the poet of the court of Rasulullah. Hassan, in fact, he wrote lines of poetry at Ghadir al-Khum. And he wrote extensive poetry that, in fact, if you read the poetry, it tells you exactly what Mawla means. Because some people said Mawla means friend. But his poetry says, no, Mawla means Hadi and Imam. If you are going to say that someone is a friend, you wouldn't use the word Hadi and Imam. Guide and leader. You wouldn't use these terms if it's friend. He said this. Rasulullah said to Hassan, Hassan, your words are not your words. Your words are the words of the angels. He said, as long as you write in our honor, your words are blessed. History said after Rasulullah's wafat and shahadat, Hassan began to write for others. Rasulullah gave a principle, as long as you write for us, you are on haqq, you are on the right path. We move forward and we look at what was happening during the era of Amir al-Mu'mineen. For example, when Siffin happened, were there people who were using poetry? We have authentic traditions that tell us that in Siffin and in Jamal, when people were using poetry against Amir al-Mu'mineen and his army, Ammar bin Yasir as well as Malik al-Ashtar, they responded to them in poetry. And Amir al-Mu'mineen was witness to that. And he did not stop them. Furthermore, when the third Khalifa was killed, assassinated, and the issue emerged, there was poetry done at that point. But I want to take us to another moment in history. When Saqifa happened, who was reciting poetry at that moment in time? After the wafat and the shahadat of Rasulullah, there was a moment in time, there was a man by the name of Abdullah ibn Abu Sufyan ibn Harith ibn Abdul Muttalib. Not that Abu Sufyan, huh? This was the grandson of Harith. Harith was the brother of Abu Talib and Abdullah. Therefore, he was the uncle of Rasulullah, the son of Abdul Muttalib. When Saqifa happened, he was not in Medina. He had just come to Medina. When he just came to Medina and he heard that they have appointed someone else to be the Khalifa, right away he began to recite poetry. And he began to say, I am shocked that you have picked amongst your ummah and you have taken the Khilafah away from Banu Hashim. When in Banu Hashim is Abul Hasan, referring to Amir al-Mu'mineen. And he said, was Ali, he's referring to Amir al-Mu'mineen, he says, was he not the first person? Was there anyone before him who prayed to your Qibla? And was there anyone who knew more about the Quran and the Sunnah? These were the words that Abdullah said right away at the moment of Saqifa. Those saying for haqq. We go further. During the time of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, from Medina to Makkah, to Karbala, to Kufa, to Sham, the Ahlul Bayt alayhi salam, there were times where Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam was using poetry himself. We're told on the plains of Karbala. You'll remember when Imam remembered us on the plains of Karbala on the day of Ashura, that whenever you drink cold water, remember me, my Shia. That was in form of poetry. Sayyida Zainab throughout would use poetry to get the point across. Time and time again, the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam themselves used poetry. Furthermore, during the time of the fourth Imam, the poet of the court of the Ahlul Bayt was the great poet Farazdaq. That moment in time when Farazdaq notices that the ruler, he is trying to get to Hajar al-Aswad, when he's trying to get to the Kaaba, the black stone in the Kaaba, at that moment in time, nobody gives him space. When Imam Sajjad, he comes, the entire crowd pierces, and he goes straight to Hajar al-Aswad. They said, who is this person? The arrogant ruler begins to say, I don't know who he is. Farazdaq, at that very moment, he says, you don't know who he is? He checks him right there. He says, وَالْبَيْتُ يَعْرِفُ وَالْحِلُّ وَالْحَرَمُ هَذَا التَّقِيُّ النَّقِيُّ إِن كُنْتَ جَاهِلُ. He says, if you don't know him, the haram knows him, the Kaaba knows him, the ground that you're walking on knows him. هَذَا التَّقِيُّ النَّقِيُّ. He's the one who's taqi and naqi, if you are unaware. إِن كُنْتَ جَاهِلُ. They imprisoned Farazdaq for this. Poetry shakes the hearts of man when it is said in haqq. At that point in time, they imprisoned him. And the Imam sent his salutations to Farazdaq. We go further. During the time of the fifth Imam, Kumayt al-Asadi. Kumayt al-Asadi was the poet of the court of the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam. He was someone who recited poetry in honor of the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam tremendously, to the point that the fifth Imam, he faces towards the Kaaba. He is doing tawaf, circumambulating around the Kaaba. When he's circumambulating around the Kaaba, he stops, the fifth Imam stops, and he raises his hand. Imagine anyone who gets this dua from the Imam. He says, Allahumma arham Kumayt, Allahumma arham Kumayt, Allahumma arham Kumayt. 3 times the Imam says, may Allah have mercy on Kumayt, may Allah have mercy on Kumayt, may Allah have mercy on Kumayt, the poet of the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam. He had said poetry in honor of the Ahlul Bayt. They imprisoned him. When they imprisoned him, the Imam alayhimus salam sent 10,000 dirhams to Kumayt in prison. At that point in time, Kumayt said, Yabna Rasulullah, he sent the message. He sent the message back to him. He said, Yabna Rasulullah, I did not say this verses of poetry for any dirham or dinar, for any money. I said it because it was haqq. At that point in time, the message came. He says, Kumayt says, Yabna Rasulullah, if there's anything that you can give me, just give me your shirt, because this will benefit me when I die in the akhirah. This will benefit me not only here, but there. Imam sent a reply back. He said, Kumayt, know one thing about us Ahlul Bayt. Once we give something to someone, we never take it back. This 10,000 dirham, you want it, you do what you want with it. If you want it, keep it. If you want it, don't want it, give it away. It makes no difference to us. But he said, this shirt we give you. Take this shirt, it is of your benefit. We go further. During the time of the 6th Imam, Sayyid al-Himyari. Sayyid al-Himyari was known as the master of all poets. He had written extensive lines of poetry during the time of the 6th Imam, to the extent that we are told when Sayyid al-Himyari, when he was about to die, he was on his deathbed, they say that there was a black spot that emerged on his forehead. Because some say he was part of the Khawarij or that group and he changed his view and he became one of the followers of the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam. Kumayt, Sayyid al-Himyari got a dot on his head and that dot began to expand. When that dot began to expand over his face, it began to cover his face. When he was dying, there were some people who liked him there and there were some people who had some animosity and hatred towards him at that point in time. Those people who had animosity and hatred towards Sayyid al-Himyari, they said this was an evil person. It's evident, it's clear that his face is becoming black. At that point in time, Sayyid al-Himyari on his deathbed, he faces towards Najaf al-Ashraf and he says, Sayyidi wa Mawlai Amirul Mu'mineen, is this how you treat your poets? He said 3 times, Amirul Mu'mineen, I am your poet. At that point, everyone who was standing there, they said, the 3rd time he had not even finished saying that, is this how you treat your believers, your poets? A white dot appeared on the face of Sayyid al-Himyari. And that white dot began to expand. And those same faces that were mocking him and smiling and making fun, they began to frown because his face became illuminated. This was a sign that the Ahlul Bayt gave right there and then at that moment. We go further during the time of our, as you know, the 7th Imam was in prison and the 7th Imam faced tremendous persecution. When we go to the time of the 8th Imam, Da'bal al-Khizai, who was the great poet of the court of the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam, Da'bal, who the Imam himself, imagine, Da'bal would sit on a chair, the Imam would sit on the floor. And Da'bal would recite poetry. The Imam would make him sit there. And they're in a gathering and the Imam says, Da'bal, recite poetry in our honor. And Da'bal begins to recite how tragic is the story of the Ahlul Bayt. Someone is buried in Medina and someone is buried in Karbala and again someone is buried in Medina. And he continues to the point that the Imam says that there is someone who is buried in Tus. He says, Yabna Rasulullah, who is this? I'm not aware. He says, this is me who will be buried in this land. And that marsiya continues. We continue until the time of the 10th Imam, Imam Hadi alayhi salam. When we get to his time and his era, Ibn Sikit, the great companion of the Ahlul Bayt, who was the poet of the court of the Ahlul Bayt. You remember Ibn Sikit? Ibn Sikit was that person that when the ruler asked him in an arrogant way, he said, Ibn Sikit, he was teaching the children of the ruler. Ibn Sikit was a tutor for them. He was an educated man, a knowledgeable man, and a poet. He says, Ibn Sikit, the ruler says, Ibn Sikit, are my children afdal, are my children greater, or are the children of Ali ibn Abi Talib? Ibn Sikit was a man of justice. At that moment, and a poet, he couldn't tolerate it. He became enraged. Ibn Sikit said, you're asking me if your children are of higher status, or if the children of Ali ibn Abi Talib are at a higher status. I'll tell you one thing right here, right now. Your children do not even compare to the children of Qambar, the servant of Ali ibn Abi Talib. He said this and it was kalimatul haq, it was the truth. But he gave a big price. They cut his tongue out. The same way they cut the tongue of Maytham at-Tammar. But he said the truth. Time and time passed, we found that truth began to emit itself. This is what poetry, when we come forward and we say poetry is cultural, poetry has no Islamic basis, that's not a comprehensive analysis. That's not telling the whole picture. Poetry, especially within our madhab, has a long tradition and a long basis where you and I must implement it and understand its basis so that you and I can implement it in our lives and use it for good. If you read the history of the poets of Arabia, if you read the poets of the history of the subcontinent and others, you will understand the clarity of the matter very clearly. Why did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala send the miracle of the Quran? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, according to the Ahlul Bayt, always sent the miracle according to the time. We have a very clear tradition from Imam Hadi alayhi salam on this matter. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. They asked, Yabna Rasulullah, why did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala send certain miracles to certain prophets? For example, why did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala send Musa alayhi salam, the particular miracle of magic, the staff? The Imam alayhi salam responded and he said that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave the miracle to Musa of the staff because of that time and that era. People believed at that time and that era that the Hujjah was magic. They believed that it was the time of magic. So when they came forward, the magicians came forward and they put their ropes on the ground, they appeared to become snakes. People have said that they, for example, they dipped the ropes into mercury and it gave the illusion of moving. But when Musa alayhi salam brought his staff, and that staff actually became a serpent, a snake, and it ate the other ropes, the Quran said, فَأُلْقِيَ السَّحَرَةُ سُجَّدًا, that all of the magicians went into prostration. And they said, آمَنَّا بِرَبِّ مُوسَى وَهَارُونَ. We all accept, we do taslim, we bring belief, amanna, we bring belief on the Lord of Musa and Harun. Because they knew that what we're doing is an illusion, but what Musa has is actual truth. And we cannot compare. Further, the companion of the Imam says to Imam Hadi, he says, Yabna Rasulullah, then we went to the time furthermore of Isa alayhi salam, Jesus peace be upon him. Why did he give this particular miracle to Jesus to bring the dead back to life? The Imam said that was the time of medicine. And because of that time in that era, medicine had evolved. But even the doctors of that time knew that bringing the dead back to life, this was not their job. This was the job of something greater than them. Therefore, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave them that miracle. Further, during the time of Rasulullah, why did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give the miracle of the Quran? Because during the time of the Arabs, they had so much pride, they had so much integrity, they had so much belief in their literature, in particular their poetry, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, I will give you a miracle according to your words. Do you know how the Arabs had divided their world? The Arabs in pre-Islamic Jahiliyyah Arabia, they had divided the entire world into Arab and Ajam. Arab meaning Arab. What does Ajam mean? Ajam, yes, so many times people say Persia, for example. But what is the root word? Ajam literally means someone who is mute, someone who cannot speak, someone who does not have the ability to talk. This is how much integrity and belief they had in their language. That either you are Arab, as someone may say Ahl Zaban, you are Arabic, you speaking, or you're not, you don't know how to speak. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, if this is your belief, then we will break this belief. To the point that the Arabs used to put on the Kaaba sab'a mu'allaqat, the 7 greatest works of poetry. And there was a poet of the Arabians named Sha'sha. Sha'sha would not leave his house unless it was once a year, when the festival of poetry was happening in Mecca. Because he did not want his language to become changed because of speaking to the commoners. You know, they say Mir Anis used to do this as well. He used to protect his language, so his poetry had a certain flavor to it. Sha'sha did the same thing. He did not speak to anyone, he was completely quiet. He only wrote. When he came to the Kaaba that one year, they put a few verses of the Quran on the Kaaba. He began to read the different poetry, he looked at it, but then when he began to recite and read the verses of the Quran, he had to say one thing and one thing alone. He said, Ma hadha kalamul bashar. This is not the word of a human being. Allah. Sallu ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. Therefore, when we come to Arabic, it's not like English and other language where there's just poetry and prose. In Arabic, scholars have said there are actually three categories. The first category is poetry. The first category is prose, nasr. Then there's another category which is poetry or shi'r. There is a third category called Quran. If you remember the famous translator of the Quran, Muhammad Marmaduke Pickthall, who translated the Quran, he gave a very beautiful quote when he became a Muslim. He said the Quran is neither poetry nor prose, but a unique fusion of the two. And that is the miracle of the Quran al-Majid wa Furqan al-Hamid. And that is what the Quran itself says. If you don't believe that this is the work of something divine, then bring one verse according to it. Bring one verse that is equal to the Quran. A standing challenge of the Quran. You can't do it. It's not possible. Therefore, you and I, as followers of the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam, we must be mindful and understand our tradition. And I say this as a message to our next generation. When we come to the subcontinent, when you look at, for example, the poetry, there is a rich tradition of poetry, for example, in Arabia. There is a rich tradition of poetry, for example, in the Persian subcontinent, in Farsi languages. You know, I mentioned Iqbal at the beginning. Iqbal, many people in the Persian subcontinent, in the Indian subcontinent, know Iqbal for many reasons. But do you know that Iqbal actually wrote more in Farsi than he wrote in Urdu? And in fact, the Islamic Revolution has a big they actually implemented his vision. And they actually accept this, interestingly enough. Ayatollah Khamenei has actually said that the vision of Iqbal, who they call Iqbal Lahori, because he was from Lahore, is actually the realization of the Islamic Revolution. But sometimes people don't realize how powerful poetry can be. In fact, poetry can go much beyond after one has even died. Because you and I may come forward, many times the greatest poets are not even realized in their own life. For example, Ghalib in the Indian subcontinent. Ghalib became very famous after he died. You may say, why did I mention Ghalib? Let me give you a share. Ghalib nadeem dost se aati hai boo dost, mashghool haq hu bandagi abu turab mein. These poets understood that there was a certain flavor in the love of Ali ibn Abi Talib. That when you love Ali ibn Abi Talib, that haqq manifests itself in the form of poetry. You see that the Ahlul Bayt, when they came to the ahadith and the traditions, our sixth Imam tells us how important it is to write poetry in honor of the Ahlul Bayt. The Imam alayhimus salam says, whoever composes one verse, 2 lines of poetry in honor of the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam and makes 50 people cry, fahuwa fil Jannah. That person will be in Jannah. The Imam continues, he doesn't stop there. He says, if you make 40 people cry, fahuwa fil Jannah. That person will be in Jannah. No, 30 people, fahuwa fil Jannah. 20, 10, to the point the tradition says, if you make one verse and make one person cry, you will be in Jannah. The Imam says, even if they don't cry, if they make a sad face, you will be in Jannah. Allahu Akbar. Imam is taking the zamanat of Jannah for one who writes poetry in honor of the Ahlul Bayt and makes people weep and cry. We have a rich history which we cannot neglect. The work of the likes of Mirza Dabir and Mir Anis, who even if you go to the subcontinent today and you study Urdu formally, you must study in your master's classes, for example, the works of Mir Anis. 4 volumes of Marsiya or Marasi as they are called in plural. You must study them. Whether you are Shia Sunni doesn't matter. The idea is the work that he has done has been profound. We have another tradition from our 8th Imam that says that when you recite our poetry, when you write poetry in our honor, the words come to us, the Ahlul Bayt, first to ask permission before they go to you then. That the Imam is a guiding hand. Why? Because these verses of poetry kept and helped keep the memory of the Imam alive throughout the times and throughout the history. Therefore, to my next generation, to my brothers and sisters, I encourage you and I implore you to write and to write extensively in honor of the Ahlul Bayt. We need hundreds, thousands. We need an army of people using the qalam, the pen, to write for the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam. We need dozens of people writing, because today we don't yet have someone who is Mir Anis in English. We don't have these likes, or I am not aware of them. We must give rise to this next generation that actually brings these poems and this poetry of the Ahlul Bayt to the forefront, not only in this part of the world, within our circles, but to the masses. And trust me and believe me, the Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam will help us in this regard. You are not alone. We go back to Da'bal al-Khizai. What did he say? The Imam told him, recite poetry. The 8th Imam's time, Imam al-Rida alayhi salam says, Da'bal, recite poetry in our honor. At that point in time, Da'bal says, someone is buried in Medina, and someone in Karbala, and someone again in Medina. This is the tragedy and calamity. But then he begins to recite some poetry that's devastating. Da'bal says, Afatima kumi yabnatil khair wa andubi. Afatima. He says these lines of poetry with respect to Fatima al-Zahra, drawing this imagery of Fatima al-Zahra and Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. Allahu Akbar. That he says with respect to Imam al-Hussein, on the day of Karbala, he was killed and martyred by the Furat. Why by the Furat? Because water was accessible so close to him and he did not get the water. Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar. He says, Fatima kumi yabnatil khair wa andubi. He says, Fatima, daughter of goodness, rise and cry and weep for your son Hussein. Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar. Rise and cry and weep. We are told that when you hear the musibah, the 6th Imam says, when you hear the musibah of the Ahlul Bayt, do not cry softly. The word the Imam uses, sayha. Ayatullah Wahid al-Khurasani says, sayha means a loud wailing. Because this memory has kept Imam al-Husayn's memory, helps keep it alive. We are alive because of the zikr of Muhammad and Muhammad. When we go further, Da'bal says, Fatima, if you had seen Hussein on the Yawm Ashura, you would have slapped your face and cried because of the tragedy of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. Allahu Akbar. Da'bal devastated the heart of the Imam. But I want to take you to Karbala. What happened? We are told as the Qafila approached towards Medina, when Imam Sajjad, Bibi Zainab, after Karbala, from Kufa to Sham, after they had stopped in Karbala and they had finally come back to Medina, at that point we are told that Imam Sajjad, before they got to the city, he came to Bishr and he said, Bishr, I have heard that your father recited poetry. Do you also recite poetry? He says, I do try, Ibn Rasulullah. He says, I want you to recite some poetry so that the people of Medina know that we have entered into Medina. At that point in time, we are told that the Imam alayhi salam stops the caravan and Bishr goes forward. He says, Ya ahla Yathrab, la maqama lahum biha, qad qutila al-Husayn bi Karbala. He says, oh people of Medina, Medina is not a place to live in anymore. قَدْ قُتِلَ الْحُسَيْنُ بِكَرْبَلَا. They have killed Hussein in Karbala. They say when he said this, the people began to cry and they began to weep. They say even Sayyida Zainab recited poetry before she entered back into Medina. What did Sayyida Zainab say? She said, Madinatu jaddina la taqbalina. She says, oh Medina of our grandfather Rasulullah, do not accept us. She said, why? They said, why? They said, because when we left the city, when we left this Medina, we had Ali Akbar, we had Qasim, we had Abu Fadl al-Abbas, we had all of them. But now when we come back to Medina, there is no one with us. Ajrukum ala Allah, ajrukum ala Allah. Final few moments, I won't take much of your time. We are told that there's a moment when someone comes towards the horse rider who is telling the news of what has happened. They say, for example, this happened on the 1st of Safar. Historians have different arguments. They say that she came straight to the horse rider and she said to the horse rider, what did you say? The horseman said, قَدْ أُقْتِلَ الْحُسَيْنُ بِكَرْبَلَا. She said, I want to know what happened. He said, I want to give you condolences. I want to give you condolences of your son Abbas. She said, I did not ask you about my son. One after the other. They went son after son. She had 4 sons. Until the moment that he said, I want to give you condolences of your son Abu Fadl al-Abbas. She said, I did not ask you about Abu Fadl al-Abbas. tell me about Hussein. He said, they have killed Hussein on the plains of Karbala. At that moment, she began to beat herself and say, Wa Husaina. But they say, historians said, Ummul Banin, the mother of Abu Fadl al-Abbas, she did not go straight home. She went to Jannatul Baqi. When she went to Jannatul Baqi, she began to recite poetry in Jannatul Baqi. What did she say in Jannatul Baqi? Ajrukum ala Allah. It's very difficult. The musibah of Ahlul Bayt. You know what we are told? We are told the musibah of Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam. We don't know what really happened. We would not be able to contain ourselves if we knew what happened to them. This is what the Ahlul Bayt have told us. Ummul Banin, she got to Jannatul Baqi, she made one grave, and then she made another grave with her fingers, and a third, and a fourth, and she wiped all of them away, until the moment in time she began to say, Ya Hussein, Wa Hussein, Ya Hussein, Wa Hussein. This is the lines of poetry that Ummul Banin said. She said, had people seen the advance of the son of mine named Abbas, my 4 Haidari lions, she said they would have been astonished. She said further in her poetry, Ummul Banin says that those sons of mine, she says, don't call me Ummul Banin anymore, because Ummul Banin is the one who has many sons. I had 4 Haidari lions. They all sacrificed themselves in Karbala. And then she says poetry in honor of Abu Fadl al-Abbas. She says, my son Abbas, I heard they cut your hands before you fell. She said that if you had gotten a sword, you would have been protecting Hussein. I know you would have. Ajrukum ala Allah. This calamity, 2 minutes I will take of your time, of the musibah of Abu Fadl al-Abbas. You have the dhari of Abu Fadl al-Abbas here. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant you your hajat through the Babul Hawaij Abu Fadl al-Abbas. Ajrukum ala Allah. Hawsala. Ajrukum ala Allah. Ajrukum ala Allah. 2 minutes. They say, I'm telling Ummul Banin, and you all give your pursa to Ummul Banin. Ummul Banin, your son Abu Fadl al-Abbas, when he was coming back on the day of Ashura, they say that he had a mashk, he had a water skin. When he had a water skin, Ummul Banin, you weren't there in Karbala. Let me tell you what happened in Karbala. He had a water skin and he just wanted to get to the tents. They shot an arrow towards the arm of Abu Fadl al-Abbas. He took the water skin, he put it in his other hand. When he took the water skin, he put it in his other hand. At that moment, they shot another arrow at his hand. He put the water skin in his mouth. When he put the water skin in his mouth, they shot an arrow towards his face. When they shot an arrow towards his face, we're told at that moment in time, he began to sway on the horse. The water spilt. When the water spilt, he fell towards the ground. At that point, historians begin to say, they say that he began to shake onto the ground, Abu Fadl al-Abbas, and he told his horse, do not take me back to the tents, because I promised the children of Hussein water, and I was not able to get them any water. There was a zakir. Ajrukum ala Allah. Ajrukum ala Allah. It's very difficult to recite the musibah. But these are zamana on the Yawm al-Mahshar, on the day of Qiyamah. We're told there's a moment in time where Abu Fadl al-Abbas, he comes into the dream of a zakir who's reciting the majlis. He says, Zakir, you don't recite my musibah. That night that zakir had recited the musibah of Hazrat Abu Fadl al-Abbas. He says, you don't recite my musibah. At that point, Abu Fadl al-Abbas says that you don't tell them one thing about my musibah. He says, Imam, Yabna Rasulullah, he says, Yabna Amir al-Mu'mineen, I tell them that you are courageous. I tell them you fought strong. I tell them everything. He says, you don't tell them how I fell from the horse. He says, whenever someone falls from a horse, they have their hands to support them. Oh Zakir, I didn't have any hands. I had an arrow in my eye. That arrow went through one side, it came out the other when I fell. Ajrukum ala Allah. They say when Imam al-Hussein came to the body of Abu Fadl al-Abbas, he was struggling. Do you know what he was doing? He was using his knees to get the arrow out from his hands. And he said to Imam al-Hussein, he said, Yabna Rasulillah, one request. He says, what's the request? He says that when I came into this world, the first person I saw was you. And now that I'm leaving this world, I wish that the last person I see is you. He says, then Abu Fadil, look at me. Why aren't you looking at me, Abbas? He says, Yabna Rasulullah, I would never bother you, I would never trouble you. But I have an arrow in my eye, and I don't have any hands. I have an arrow in my eye, and I don't have any hands. Ummul Baneen, your son did the ultimate wafa for Hussein. He was the most loyal. One last jumla, one last thing. Ayatullah Sayyid Mahdi Bahar al-Ulum, he was the Grand Marja roughly 300 years ago. He says when he took some Zaireen to the grave, when they went down into the Dari of Hazrat Abu Fadl al-Abbas, there were some Zaireen with Agha. At that moment, they looked at the grave of Abu Fadl al-Abbas. When they looked at the grave, they said, Agha, we thought Abu Fadl was very tall. We thought he was very strong. Why is his grave so small? Why is it so small? Agha began to beat himself. He says that they cut the body of Abu Fadl al-Abbas into so many pieces. This is all we have. This is all we have. وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون صلى الله عليك يا رسول الله صلى الله عليك يا أمير المؤمنين صلى الله عليك يا فاطمة الزهراء سيدة النساء العالمين صلى الله عليك يا حسن المجتبى السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين معتم حسين يا حسين
Hussein, 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 Hussein,
Hussein, Hussein, Hussein, Hussein, Ya Hussein, 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 Ya Hussein, 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 Ya Hussein. Allahu Akbar, this is the call of Ali Akbar for as-salat. Allahu Akbar, this is the call of Ali Akbar for as-salat. Ali Akbar for as-salat. You be the witness, he has the surah. The witness, he has the surah. He has the seerah, the Mustafa. Hussein, 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 Ya Hussein, 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 Ya Hussein. Forgive me, Mawla, I am the one who severed your access to Al-Qamar. Forgive me, Mawla, I am the one who severed your access to Al-Qamar. Severed your access to Al-Qamar. Hurriyahi, you are the free one. Hurriyahi, you are the free one. In both the dunya and akhirah. Hussein, 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 Ya Hussein, 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 Ya go fetch some water for thirsty children from Al-Fura. Oh, Waka, let me go fetch some water for thirsty children from Al-Fura. For thirsty children from Al-Fura. Oh, will you come back, Ya Qamar-e Hashim? Oh, will you come back, Ya Qamar-e Hashim? Or will this lead to your al-wida? Hussein, Husseina, Hussein, Husseina, Hussein, Husseina, Ya Hussein. Hussein, Husseina, Hussein, Husseina, Hussein, Husseina, Ya Hussein. Tell me, will I be counted among the martyrs of Karbala? Yammu, tell me, will I be counted among the martyrs of Karbala? Among the martyrs of Karbala. Oh, nephew Qasim, you are a hero. Oh, nephew Qasim, you are a hero. Hal min nasir yansurna. Ya Ummi, I hear my father calling. Hal min nasir yansurna. Hal min nasir yansurna. I may be asghar, my heart is akbar. I may be asghar, my heart is akbar. I am the grandson of Murtaza. Hussein, Husseina, Hussein, Husseina, Hussein, Husseina, Ya Hussein. Hussein, Husseina, Hussein, Husseina, Hussein, Husseina, Ya Hussein. This is the manzil of mutmainna. This is the moment of inna lillah. This is the manzil of mutmainna. This is the moment of inna lillah. This is the moment of inna lillah. Lower me into Nashib Sahara. Lower me into Nashib Sahara. To Ummi Zara Azul Jannah. Hussein, Husseina, Hussein, Husseina, Hussein, Husseina, Ya Hussein. Hussein, Husseina, Hussein, Husseina, Hussein, Husseina, Ya Hussein. Oh, Father Aina, oh, Father Aina, this is your daughter, this is Sakina. Oh, Father Aina, oh, Father Aina, this is your daughter, this is Sakina. This is your daughter, this is Sakina. My heart is broken, my wounds are open. My heart is broken, my wounds are open. Oh, Ummu Abba, Siba, Wafa. Hussein, Husseina, Hussein, Husseina, Hussein, Husseina, Ya Hussein. Hussein, Husseina, Hussein, Husseina, Hussein, Husseina, Ya Hussein. You are the martyr we venerate. Your tragedy we commemorate. You are the martyr we venerate. Your tragedy we commemorate. Your tragedy we commemorate. We are the Shia, we are your Ummah. We are the Shia, we are your Ummah. We are the students of Karbala. Hussein, Husseina, Hussein, Husseina, Hussein, Husseina, Ya Hussein. Hussein, Husseina, Hussein, Husseina, Hussein, Husseina, Ya Hussein.
Hussein, Hussein. Hussein, Hussein. Hussein, Hussein. Hussein, Hussein. Hussein, Hussein.
the skies blackened, the earth trembled, the skies blackened. Hussein has been martyred, Hussein has been martyred. The earth trembled, the skies blackened. The earth trembled, the skies blackened. Hussein has been martyred, Hussein has been martyred. I told Zuljana, please don't take father. Whoever goes, they never return. I told Zuljana, please don't take father. Whoever goes, they never return. My father then told me, to him I'm so dear. My father then told me, to him I'm so dear. The time has now come for us to part. The earth trembled, the skies blackened. The earth trembled, the skies blackened. Hussein has been martyred, Hussein has been martyred. After you were slain, they came into our tent. They slapped me on my face and snatched my earrings. After you were slain, they came into our tent. They slapped me on my face and snatched my earrings. Do they not know we are of Ahlul Bayt? Do they not know we are of Ahlul Bayt? Oh grandfather, where are you? The earth trembled, the skies blackened. The earth trembled, the skies blackened. Hussein has been martyred, Hussein has been martyred. Sakina cannot sleep, her father has been slain. Oh father, where are you? Sakina cannot sleep, her father has been slain. Oh father, where are you? I want to lay my head upon your chest. I want to lay my head upon your chest. When will I see you? When will I see you? The earth trembled, the skies blackened. The earth trembled, the skies blackened. Hussein has been martyred, Hussein has been martyred. When I fell down from the camel's back, Zainab cried out, no one took heed. When I fell down from the camel's back, Zainab cried out, no one took heed. But then, Father, your head fell off fully spear. But then, Father, your head fell off fully spear. When will I see you? When will I see you? The earth trembled, the skies blackened. The earth trembled, the skies blackened. Hussein has been martyred, Hussein has been martyred. The city of Sham came out to see who are these prisoners paraded through town. The city of Sham came out to see who are these prisoners paraded through town. Can it really be the family of Rasul? Can it really be the family of Rasul? The daughters of Hussein without any veil. The earth trembled, the skies blackened. The earth trembled, the skies blackened. Hussein has been martyred, Hussein has been martyred. My brother Ali Asghar, he died without a drop. Now how can I drink while he thirsty? My brother Ali Asghar, he died without a drop. Now how can I drink while he's thirsty? I want to leave this evil dungeon of Yazid. I want to leave this evil dungeon of Yazid. When will I see you? When will I see you? The earth trembled, the skies blackened. The earth trembled, the skies blackened. Hussein has been martyred, Hussein has been martyred. O men of Yazid, please take away this tray. I am not hungry, I want my father. O men of Yazid, please take away this tray. I am not hungry, I want my father. On the tray there lay my father's head. On the tray they lay my father's head. I want to be with you. The time is now come. The earth trembled, the skies blackened. The earth trembled, the skies blackened. Hussein has been martyred. Hussein has been martyred. Hussein, 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 Hussein,
Hussein, Hussein, Hussein, Hussein, Hussein, Hussein, Hussein, Hussein, Hussein, Hussein, Hussein, Hussein, Hussein, Hussein. Allahumma salli ala. Yeah.
السلام عليك يا رسول الله. السلام عليك يا علي أمير المؤمنين. السلام عليك يا فاطمة الزهراء. السلام عليك يا خديجة الكبرى. السلام عليك يا حسن المجتبى. السلام عليك يا أبا عبد الله الحسين. السلام على الحسين وعلى علي بن الحسين وعلى أولاد الحسين وعلى أصحاب الحسين، خصوصا سيدي مولاي أبو الفضل العباس ابن أمير المؤمنين وأختك زينب وأم كلثوم. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام عليك يا علي زين العابدين ومحمد بن علي الباقر وجعفر بن محمد الصادق وموسى بن جعفر الكاظم وعلي بن موسى الرضا ومحمد بن علي التقي الجواد وعلي بن محمد النقي الحادي والحسن بن علي العسكري والحجات بن الحسن المهدي. أجل الله تعالى فرجك وسهل الله مخرجك وظهورك. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. All the young ones come and please shake Maulana's hand before you leave the hall. Inshallah tomorrow we'll start at 8 o'clock sharp, so please kindly be on time. Anyone would like to sponsor any English majlises, we have open slots. You can see myself, Sister Taysin, Brother Jafar, Brother Faizan. Happy to give you details for sponsoring any majlises.